Hello, this is the video for Daf Samekh Heh. I want to talk today a little bit about some of the women's issues that come up in this daf. Today, when we think about women and Judaism and the rabbis' attitudes towards women, we usually think of them in the issue in terms of participation in the synagogue ritual, women's obligation to perform mitzvot. Maybe we think a little bit about issue of testimony, and those are all big issues that do appear in the Talmud. But there's one issue that we don't think of so much because we just don't really, it's not really an issue for us anymore, but it was an issue in the Talmud, and and that is women's participation in the Su'udah, in a festive meal. And we see that mainly expressed in two issues, perhaps a third as well. It's something I spoke about a little bit, or wrote about a little bit in my book, Reconstructing the Talmud. One of them is reclining. So when it comes to the rules of Pesach, which is really the only time that we eat, even pretending to recline anymore, there is a discussion in the Talmud and in commentaries about whether or not women recline. And the other issue comes up in our chapter, the issue of women drinking wine. Now, I should note that both of these issues are discussed not only by rabbis, but by other members of their culture. In other words, by Greeks and Romans, discuss whether or not women should recline at a meal in which men participate. Is it honorable? Does it reflect their social standing? Is it a sign of licentiousness? And they also discuss women drinking wine, both with the practical issue of did they want women to become drunk, or did they want to prevent women from becoming drunk for fear of sexual licentiousness, but also I think there was an issue of status here. A free male was somebody who showed his freedom and his wealth by drinking wine, the beverage that they really had, the elevated beverage that they had back then. And the question was, should women participate in this type of culture? As an aside that I'm not going to talk about today, I think you can see this issue re-emerge a bit in the issue of Kiddush clubs. I do not participate in a Kiddush club. We do not have such a thing here in Israel. But from what I hear, these are largely male affairs in which men gather around, sometimes during or after the tefillot, and drink whiskey. And I'm not going to get into my diatribe about the Kiddush club. But I do want to talk about one of the agadot that appears in this page. The rabbis sort of hem and haw, as they often do, about whether or not women should drink wine, saying some women do, some women don't. They don't really come to much of a resolution. But then we get this story about Choma, a woman we read about elsewhere in the Talmud, who is Abaye's wife. And she comes in front of Rava, and she says to him, "Give me mazono. My husband's not here. Give me food." And he gives it to her. He gives her an allowance to buy food while her husband's away. And then she says, "Give me wine." And he says, "I know you, Nachmani. I know Nachmani's house, Abaye's house, and that the women there don't drink wine. You, Choma, don't drink wine there in the house, and therefore I'm not going to give it to you outside of the house." Amrale, she says back to him, "By your life, he would give me wine in big, long wine flutes." And as she shows him what a wine flute looks like, her arm is revealed. And evidently, Abaye's wife, Choma, was a true temptress. Beautiful woman. And a light falls in the court, and Rava gets up and rushes home, and his wife, and he wants to go and sleep, have sex with the daughter of Rav Chisda, who is his wife. And here I think it's a very interesting tale, right? Here's Abaye's wife. Choma. She wants wine. Rava seems to say, if I give you wine, you're going to become sexually licentious. Who knows what's going to happen when your husband's away? She shows him her arm accidentally, and he gets so, let's say, hot and bothered by the whole thing that he has to go rush home and find his wife. And his wife knows what's happened. She says, "Who was in the Beit Midrash now? Was it that?" And he says it was Choma, Abaye's wife. And she goes, Rav Chisda's daughter goes and chases her until she kicks her out of Machoza, because evidently Choma has already had 3 husbands die. she seems to be this dangerous temptress type of woman. What I want to concentrate on here is Rava's figure and how rabbinic stories are often a little bit critical of the rabbis themselves. Here is Rava sort of lording it over Choma, saying, if you drink wine, you're not going to be able to control yourself. And meanwhile, all that has to happen is a little bit of her arm to show accidentally, and Rava loses all control over himself and has to rush home and sleep with his wife. So I think that there is some self-criticism in this story. He says, look, men, you're trying to control the women, but look, you don't even have control over yourselves. Now that doesn't mean that the rabbis think women don't have to be controlled as well. It means that they're showing how problematic it is for anybody to really have control over themselves, and even Rava, at the slightest temptation, just really cannot hold back and has to run home. So I think it's an interesting story. Again, I read these stories oftentimes as self-criticisms of rabbinic culture. They're not meant for us. I should reiterate that. They're not meant for the 20th century reader. They are meant for the rabbis living in the Beit Midrash to critique themselves from within. It doesn't mean that they're anti-rabbi. It just means that they're looking at their own culture and pointing out the problems in the way they themselves behave.